Welcome back to Morning Joe. Governors Howard Dean and Ed Rendell. Katty Kay still with us at the table. And joining us from Washington, the chairman of the House Select Intelligence Committee, Republican Congressman of Michigan, Mike Rogers. Congressman, thanks for being with us this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You've raised a question that hasn't been talked about enough over the last couple of days, and that is what happens to Gaddafi's stockpile of weapons when he finally goes. What concerns you most there?
Well, several things. One, we know he has thousands and thousands of pounds of chemical stockpile. We know that. We've seen it. We've talked about it. We've actually even done some inventory work prior to the lead up to all of this on his chemical weapons. We think he has some sarin gas capability. We don't know to the extent how far that goes. And he has shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles that are very concerning to us because they're so easy to get legs and walk away. All of that, I think, has a national security interest to the United States, and we ought to be awful concerned about it and very aggressive about making sure those stockpiles are protected and or taken care of.
So which people or which groups are you most concerned about getting their hands on them? Is it members of the rebel faction? Is it people coming from outside countries? Who are we talking about here?
Yes. It's all of those things. Al-Qaeda has expressed an interest. They're trying to take advantage of the chaos. We know that for a fact. We know that some of those weapon systems have been attempted to be moved. And remember, the rebels are not a homogeneous group. There are different ethnic groups. There are different tribal groups. They all have some political different stripes. The only thing that keeps them together now is they all don't like Muammar Gaddafi in charge. Well, once that happens and once that goes away, and it will, it's just a matter of time, well, then it gets a little more fuzzy, it gets a little more gray, and I'm very concerned about some of that, those weapon systems being sold on the black market, being taken for advantage from one group over another group. All of that is concerning. Or, you know, Gaddafi is still in charge of elements of the regime. Does he make that decision to do something pretty horrific here in the last few days? We just don't know the answer to that. I don't think so, but it's certainly something we should worry about. So all of that together says we better have, in the next 48 to 2 hours to 2 weeks, we better be very, very aggressive about having a U.S. interest in securing those weapons systems as best as we can.
Governor Rendell.
Congressman, it's Ed Rendell. You raise a very legitimate concern, but what do you suggest? You say we should get aggressive. Play that out for us. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, there's lots of things to do, and it doesn't include big boots on the ground, any of that our intelligence services working with the TNC can do to be in certain places to make sure that those weapon systems are accounted for.
Accounted for, I understand, but what happens to them? Let's assume they've got that array of weapons that you say. Do we take them? Does NATO take them? I mean, what do we do, and how do we get that done?
Yeah, exactly. I would argue that NATO ought to be a part of this and ought to take custody of those particular weapon systems. You know, there was a plan to incinerate the chemical stockpiles that stalled out a few years ago. We ought to just ensure that happens, and they ought to be there as soon as humanly possible to continue that process and not allow those particular facilities to fall in the hands of people who either may want to sell it or use it. And same with the other weapon systems, which is a little more, it's a little more nebulous because there's so many of them. And remember, he proliferated on these weapon systems because of his experience of being bombed in the 80s. So he went out and bought all of these anti-aircraft weapon systems, and there are lots of them. And our concern is that they start moving. So that has to be a joint effort between the TNC, NATO, and us. We shouldn't be bashful about saying, listen, we may have to put some of our American people through diplomatic means and other to make sure that those weapon systems don't start walking away. And that's a combination of everybody, Ed.
Katty Kay.
Chairman, we all saw what happened in Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein. What's your intelligence on what's going to happen in this transition process, and particularly thinking about how the rebels might incorporate Gaddafi supporters, what they might do with the military, that kind of thing?
Well, I think we've learned a valuable lesson in Iraq about just wholesale dismissal. A lot of hard feelings here, as you might understand, but wholesale dismissal on a place that really doesn't have a professional civil service can be very dangerous. So just because they're with the regime doesn't automatically mean that they're Gaddafi loyalists. Obviously, thousands of them are walking away and have walked away and said, I'm not engaged in the fight here. I was just serving my country as it was. So there's a difference between that individual and somebody who's passionately pro-Gaddafi and willing to continue the fight even after the fall of the Gaddafi regime. Very big difference. We've learned that you can separate those two groups. Not always easy, but it can be done. And I think that's where the United States can play an important role here on providing that advice and counsel about how to get through what is the most difficult period, is just in the weeks and months right after the fall. And so this really needs to start now. All of this planning has to happen now to be prepared so that, and we're going to have some fits and starts. It's not going to be easy, but we can get through that in a better way if we bring that expertise, say, listen, don't wholesale eliminate your whole military, don't eliminate your whole intelligence services, don't dismantle your civil service, what's left of it. We'll need some of that expertise to rebuild and then put folks in who are pro-democracy in Libya.
Governor Howard Dean.
Mr. Chairman, I got a quick question for you, the same one I asked Keith Ellison a little earlier in the show. Money. This is going to take some money. We don't have much. A lot of fights about spending. Where do we get the money to do what I think we ought to do, which is pretty much I agree with you on.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I just agreed. Howard Dean and I just agreed. That way we made news today.
You're in trouble. You're in big trouble now.
I think
Only
so.
in your home district.
Thanks,
Your primary
thanks, Howard.
opponent is getting ready right now.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Howard. Boy, you're kidding. I'm kidding, obviously. There's several ways I think we can do this. And again, this is another place that U.S. expertise can be very, very helpful on the ground, both on a commercial sense. So through diplomatic means, you bring in a commercial interest who can re-engage the oil production, which they're going to need those resources. It's Libyan resources. It's a Libyan economic. It's an oil economy, and they need to get their oil economy back on its feet. I think that can be. It must be a big priority on the commercial front, as well as the assets that we've seized and other European nations have seized. We can start feeding that money back in. We don't need to write a large U.S. check, if any U.S. check at all, and I would argue for the latter, because they have the ability to reconnect these resources pretty quickly. But we have to help them do that, and that's going to take that short time in the interim. But that's where the seized money can come in to get them through that period. And we think there's plenty of money to do that. We just need to make sure we know who we're giving it to and it's going to the right purposes.
Hey, Congressman, let's stick with the issue of money and the economy in this country. Part of your district includes a portion of Detroit, a city devastated over the years, where the only good news is Justin Verlander and the Tigers, maybe. And a state where the unemployment rate hovers around 10 or 11%, I think. The President of the United States is coming to Detroit right after Labor Day to lay out a jobs program. What do you want to hear from the President?
Well, listen, it's been an unbelievable surge of regulation on business. When you talk to manufacturers, they are pulling their hair out at all the new regulations that face them. And one of the reasons you see so much capital, U.S. capital, private capital sitting on the sidelines, over $2 trillion, is because if they hire Mike Rogers tomorrow, they have no idea how much money Mike Rogers is going to cost them next year because of all this new regulation. The health care bill puts so much uncertainty in their ability to hire. I'd love the president to say, listen, we are not going to raise taxes on business. We're going to stop demonizing business. After all, it's business that hires people. And we're going to have a freeze on regulation. We're going to give you a breather here so you can get your feet back up underneath you and you can start investing in yourself. It's a simple plan, but I think this economy is ready to roar if the government just gets out of the way. And right now, I mean, think about it. The president's been beaten up on business. Business is bad, and they're terrible, and they have a corporate jet. It's really a small and petty way to try to deal with what is a major concern, and that's the lack of jobs. Because government, it doesn't create a job. Private sector does. Let them do it.
You know what else you're going to have to deal with? You're going to have to deal with Governor Rendell shaking his head here. Go ahead,
is he fidgeting in his chair right now? I can see it.
No, I understand. As a governor, I understand the effect of overregulation, and you talk about businesses and taxes, but look at the American people right now. Tell them, you think it's okay that 38% of our corporations pay no income tax at all, no business tax?
Well, listen, I'm all for tax reform, but
let's do it. Let's do it now. Let's do it before Christmas. Let's make that
you and I
part of the big bill.
You and I will agree on tax reform. The problem is you can't continue taking money out of the way the president proposed raising taxes. 53% of the people paying it were small business owners. And if we're ever going to get out of this mess, we have to have small businesses believing they can take the chance, which is that's called American enterprise, take the risk to hire somebody and try to grow their business. Right now, they look at all of this uncertainty and think, there is no way I can take this risk, and I'm barely making it.
No,
so
I understand that.
I'd be for tax reform, but
And
it
you
can't
are
be on the
clearly-
backs of people who are paying a lot of taxes already. That doesn't make any sense to take that money out of local communities.
But you're clearly a leader in the Republican caucus. Someone's got to talk sense. We've got to do something big, more than $1.5 trillion. Let's sit down and let's do tax reform and let that revenue go into dealing with the problems that we face with our debt and our deficit. It's the right thing to do, and it will help us.
And the only place I'm going to disagree with you on this is that the only side that I hear from across the aisle is revenue means tax increases. You got to tax people more to get new revenue.
Tax reform.
Well, I'm for tax reform as long as it's focused on getting people back to work. The best new revenue the federal government gets is somebody who is unemployed today, who is working and pays taxes tomorrow because they have a job.
The only trouble is you can't get there by cutting public service jobs and throwing 1 million people out of work, which is what you guys just did.
I missed that
I said
part.
you can't get there by cutting the heck out of the money you're sending to the states and putting 1 million state employees out of work, which is what you guys just did in that debt deal.
Well,
now you got 1 million more people out of work that you got to make up for somehow in order to, you want to balance the budget. I agree, we need more jobs, but you're not going to get there by
here's
giving
the problem.
business breaks to people who already have them.
Well, and there, so you get caught right in that same trap. Oh, those horrible businesses again. Where those horrible businesses, how could they do it?
If the banks would behave a little bit better in this country, we might have some more jobs.
If you start hiring people at the state and local government levels, and we did at the federal government, the president tried it. He had 2 years to do what he wanted, hired something like 250,000 new people. It takes away from the local economy. The government can't be responsible for the jobs in the United States. If the only way you can be middle class anymore in America is work for the government, we are in serious trouble. We need to get manufacturing back, and you don't do that by punishing businesses and demonizing them.
That's a fair point, but tax reform, let's do it.
I'm for it as long as it doesn't. As long as it's growth related, Ed, you and I are going to get along fine.
Look at that. Everybody's getting along.
Let's sing Kumbaya.
Congressman Mike Rogers,
Can we have a group hug here, please?
Have a virtual hug.
Mike should be on set with us.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it, Chairman.
Thanks.
Coming up just weeks after the S&P down.